Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com.
All right, welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. I'm your guest host for this evening, Carl Jackson, sitting in, and we're here to talk about Joe Biden's, or President Biden's, State of the Union address last night, and I am joined by my guest, Kevin McCullough of That Kevin Show. Kevin, welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight.
Thank you, Carl. Great to be with you. Good to see you on election night this week. Busy week when you think about it.
Yeah, it has been. Kevin, let's just, right off the top, give me your first impression of the State of the Union address last night.
I think Joe Biden has real problems giving speeches where he's trying to stake out a place where he's wanting to look serious, but he just ends up looking buffoonish. And last night reminded me of the speech that he gave in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia. Yes. with the red cast on the Independence Hall. It looked like he was coming from the seventh realm of hell. And last night he seemed just as angry. And I don't think people tune in to the State of the Union to be yelled at, to be told that their priorities are not his priorities. Like, if you want to do that in your rallies for your campaign to crowds that are coming to see you, that's one thing. But he launched an all-out verbal abusive assault on the people of the United States last night, and I thought it was a despicable shame for a sitting president to approach the topics the way he did. And then it was almost these kind of weird little, like, oh, yeah, you don't really think that's true? Huh? It was like he was taunting and couldn't wait to kind of, like, go out behind the barn or something.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, it was obvious to me that it became a campaign speech, one that I wasn't expecting. But I think you nailed it right on the head. Kevin, I had the exact same thought. I was like, this is essentially the same type of speech that he gave at Independence Hall, except this is supposed to be a State of the Union speech where I expected him to lie, and he did. We'll get into that. He lied a lot, as a matter of fact. But even when he lied, I expected him to try and bring people together. He didn't attempt to do that at all. And I wonder, Kevin, I want to get your take on this. Do you think he was just placating to the far left, assuming that, listen, most Democrats, let's just be honest, Kevin, they're lemmings. A lot of the voters are on the Democrat side are lemmings. They're going to come home to vote for Joe Biden anyway. So was that a play for the far left radicals, the AOC wing, if you will?
If he's having to worry about shoring up his base now that the race is narrowed to two people, then he's in much bigger political problems than what he probably wants to be. Because what you normally look, I didn't vote for Clinton or Obama. I was too young to vote for Carter. So any of the Democratic presidents that have served in my lifetime, I was not a fan of. I did not support. Not a single one of them made an enemy of the American people in the State of the Union. They may have gone and said other things in other places that were unkind. Certainly you had, Obama and Hillary Clinton, when she was campaigning, launching kind of pejorative labels against conservatives that supported their opponents. But they didn't do that from the well of the Senate, and they didn't do that on the official dime of the United States Congress. This is an official act that he performed last night. And instead of coming and being presidential and saying, here's where we're at, these are the things I said we were going to do, this is what we've delivered, this is what we still need yet to work on, which is kind of the parlance I would expect it all to kind of be couched in. What we got instead was a rat-a-tat-tat Tommy gun shot at the American people who disagreed with him. And again, in an angry, taunting, psychotic way. I've never seen anything like this in a State of the Union. Campaign, those are your people coming to see you. Say whatever you want to from your podium and your lectern at your campaign. But for the State of the Union, it was a disgrace. And if I was a Democrat today, I would be waking up embarrassed that that's the man that heads my party.
Yeah, except listen, you're a better man. I think we both are than the Democrat leadership, and that just simply it's not going to happen. It was, I mean, to me, it was seriously like a game on type speech, and I got to be honest with you, Kevin. I felt concerned. I felt worried. I look at how the Biden administration has treated Trump supporters. I look at how they've treated J6 protesters. And I'm thinking and how they've been persecuting Trump himself. And I'm sitting here thinking, what else is he going to do? If he's speaking like this, I could only assume that this guy is going to get even more radical leading up to the November election.
Or if he's reelected, think about what he could do as a lame duck with kind of unlimited power at his disposal. But think about this for a second, because I knew we were going to talk about this. So I thought about, well, what would be the rationale, the motivation? Because it was calculated. That they had speechwriters work on this, and for the last 3 or 4 days, they've rehearsed it going into that. Right. They got him his meds. He stayed upright for the entire time. They planned all the details. The problem is, what's the motivation to go on offense instead of being presidential and I think it comes down to this, and this is what really worries me, is that if you act that way, you're either so desperate that you have no other choice but to try to flail and make a scene, hoping that it draws attention, or you're so filled with hubris that you think you can do whatever you want without it having any consequence. And I'm starting to be inclined to think that they are in that category, which makes me worry about election engineering, election integrity. What do they have planned up their sleeve? And are the Republicans, specifically Trump's campaign people, ready for whatever is about to come? I've been told by Laura Trump and others that associated with the campaign that they're going to have a robust, 500 lawyer per state strategy. It caused me pause last night, because I said, why would they be taking this tack when you're usually trying to win the independents that are watching on the night of the State of the Union?
Well, listen, Kevin, and I totally agree with your assessment there. And quite frankly, I've believed that for quite some time. If you go back to 2022 and you look at the messaging, even with the Biden administration, I was like, man, these guys are clowns. They're going to get crushed. And then they didn't. The red wave didn't appear, even though there were a lot of voters that did show up, but they just simply didn't appear. And my concern is that Democrats have a system in place, and we have to be mindful of that. 15 seconds to respond before we hit the next block.
Well, I do think that they're probably planning something. The question is, are the election integrity measures we've taken since 2020 enough? That'll have to wait to be seen.
That, you're absolutely right. Again, I'm speaking with Kevin McCullough. Check out his show, That Kevin Show. And actually, we'll be back with more with Kevin on the other side. Stay tuned. You're listening to Jenna Ellis Tonight. All right. Welcome back to Jenna Ellis Tonight. Again, I'm your guest host, Carl Jackson, sitting in, and I'm back with my guest, Kevin McCullough, the of That Kevin Show. Kevin, listen, we've been talking about the State of the Union address, Joe Biden's State of the Union address. Lord willing, hopefully his last State of the Union address. I want to pick up where we left off at the end of that last segment. About both of our concerns, really. Hopefully the Republican Party is prepared for what the Democrats are going to do, because Biden, if he's taking the tact that he's taking, which is to go just full on, I'm a left-wing radical, I don't care, I am going to get away with it because the media is going to fall in line and all this kind of stuff. I fear your concerns are right. The Republican Party better make sure they get ahead of this time.
I do think that there are some signs for hope. And just going back to the State of the Union for a second, I do think that if you have watched some of his reactions to reporters, to people that have taken him by surprise with different questions at different times, you've seen that angry Joe guy that we saw last night on individual little moments where he will lunge at somebody almost. And, it's interesting. A lot of the behavior, the fast talking, The in some places almost so fast that it was like it obliterated being able to be intelligibly understood because it was delivered with such rapid fire. He felt like he was racing through paragraphs of his teleprompter, and then the taunting, oh yeah, and he's like looking in the crowd and he's jawing back and forth. It's the least presidential spectacle I've ever seen at a State of the Union, and I've seen a bunch of them. But to our credit, the Republican parties in different states didn't sit around forever. So I do think we have improved measures in Nevada, in Wisconsin in particular, where the Supreme Court there said that none of the COVID voting measures were constitutional, and they undid all of them. I think that Pennsylvania has tightened up a few things. I think Georgia's done a much better job of tightening things up. And then there were states that didn't have problems that have also passed election integrity issues, like Texas, which there were people that were concerned that it was starting to go the way of some of these other states. But, states like Arizona, where you had Republicans in charge in 2020, they had the MAGA people on the ground saying there's problems, and the Republicans that were in office didn't believe them, didn't believe that there was a problem, didn't think that there was anything to worry about, basically left everything in place. And so Kari Lake's gubernatorial campaign came to an end in a very unflattering way because they still hadn't fixed anything. Do they have time to do it? Have they done anything? I'm not sure. One thing is true. Our colleague Hugh Hewitt at this network wrote a book a number of years ago called "If It's Not Close, They Can't Cheat."
Yes.
And that's what we have to do. We have to make sure that the turnout is so big. I will say one last thing on the election integrity thing. When the courts in several states outlawed the Zuckerberg drop boxes, that's going to be something that's going to help us. If you don't have a way of harvesting, then you're not going to harvest nearly as well. That was a speed lane for harvesting, to have those Zuckerberg boxes, particularly like in inner cities. If you're going to have those reduced and you're not going to be able to harvest as effectively, then those states where that's happened, it's not going to stand. And Republicans are going to do a better job at harvesting this time. They're going to do it in states where it's legal. So are we better off? I don't know. But we got to have turnout. Everybody's got to show up, because if it's not close, they can't cheat.
Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. I absolutely love it. To just follow up with something you said when it comes to the state of Arizona, recently interviewed J. Christian Adams of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. Yep. He's exceptional at this stuff. And he admitted that for the most part, most states have gotten their act together, obviously some better than others. But his concern was still Arizona, because still the Republicans are acting as if they don't necessarily believe that what happened in 2022 will happen again. So get your act together.
Can I throw
Arizona
a complete curveball at you?
Yeah, sure.
Can I throw a complete curveball at you? So
sure.
I was in this conversation about this very thing with some people here in New York yesterday, and I said, but one of the things that Trump's always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. So one of the things that he may be wanting to do is trying to draw a different map. And if he was able to take a stronghold off of the map for the Democrats, that doesn't allow them to spend all the money that they would spend in a swing state. So, and I'm not saying I know this as an inside gospel truth, but if he's looking at Lee Zeldin as a running mate who came this close to being governor a couple of years ago here in New York, with Kathy Hochul, and still has immense popularity across the state, just putting someone like that on his ticket and then letting Lee just basically campaign in New York full time, it would create a dilemma for the Biden people that they would then have to spend a lot of resources on TV in New York City itself, which is it's the most expensive market on the planet. If they have to drain resources to win one of their big foundational states, that could help us in the swing state. So I'm hoping that the creative, out-of-the-box thinking, because if you win New York, you don't need Arizona. You don't need half of them. So the idea is make them play defense more, and that gives us the opportunity to stay on offense.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I'm glad that you brought that up. I've even said I'm originally from California. We only have about a minute and a half left here, and I even the Steve Garvey race. I know it's a long shot, but I appreciate any opportunity where Democrats are a little concerned that they may have to spend extra resources that they typically don't have to spend, and I will take that all day long. In just about a minute or so here, Kevin, and again, I'm speaking with my guest Kevin McCullough of That Kevin Show. Was there
Saturday
a
night,
particular
9 o'clock. Great show tomorrow
night.
Say
that again, Kevin. Say that again.
Saturday night, 9 p.m. and Sunday. If it's 9 o'clock, it's either Jenna or Kevin. On the weekends, it's Kevin, and the weeknights, it's Jenna. But join us because we got humor, we got comedy. It's going to be a blast tomorrow night.
I love listening to this guy whenever I can. I mean that with all sincerity. He's an absolute talent. Okay, so Kevin, let me ask you this: was there a particular lie, because there were plenty, that stood out to you the most, angered you the most, frustrated you the most, you felt like Republicans needed to take on the most? 30 seconds.
Well, his refusal to address the border for what it honestly is the lie that is going to be his legacy. It's going to be what he's known for. And every death associated with that, from an illegal migrant to a piece of fentanyl to anything else that's related to this issue, is on him. He has blood on his hands, and he'll have it for years to come. Man,
such a great point. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, even he started off the speech with Ukraine and all this kind of stuff, and I'm sitting there thinking, Kevin, I'm like, well, China's got military-aged men inside of our state. They're sending in fentanyl. They're sending in sear switches to make semi-automatic weapons, machine guns, and nothing. Anyway, Kevin McCullough, thank you. We'll be back with more. All right, welcome back to the Jenna Ellis Show. Excuse me. I am Carl Jackson, sitting in for Jenna today. I'm joined now by my guest, Mark Davis of the Mark Davis Show on 660 AM The Answer. Mark, it's such an honor and a pleasure to finally get to meet you. It's kind of weird that it's happening in an interview first, but absolutely love your work, man.
It is so great to be with you, Carl. I've just heard you all over the platform, all over Salem, and I've been a big fan for a long time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, let's dive right into it, just like I did with my with my earlier guest here. Your first impressions of Joe Biden's State of the Union speech, please.
It's after doing this for as long as I have, Carl, it's hard to surprise me. It's hard to shock me. I knew that it was baked in that as a Democrat president, I was going to get views that I disagreed with. I also knew that there were going to be some lies. I've become numb about the lies. The economy's doing great. The border's doing great. I knew that was coming. But never in my darkest dream did I envision being yelled at for more than an hour by an unhinged president, clearly interested in going to war with half of America. It was an unbelievable spectacle, the worst State of the Union of my life. There will never be another one worse, because God willing, it'll be his last one.
Yeah, from your mouth to God's ears here, Mark. And I totally agree with you. I was sitting there just wondering at first, what was this guy doing? And it was obviously completely political. He was not trying to be a uniter whatsoever. That's what he initially ran on. So I'm going to ask you the question that I asked my prior guest. Do you think he was simply placating to the left? And do we need to be concerned about this? Because this guy has governed so far to the left, Mark. I'm scared that we're in for God knows what leading up to November of this year.
It's funny because you've asked exactly the right question. What was in his head, or shall I say the speechwriter's head, because he just read whatever they wrote. So what really was the goal? We would like to think of the State of the Union as a coming together. And I know there's politics, and Republican and Democrat presidents are going to say different things. There's going to be agreement and disagreement. But generally speaking, we like to think of the State of the Union as the president saying, look, I know we have this problem, this problem, this problem. I want to reach out to the other side and try to do something to make these problems better. Clearly not his goal. His obvious goal, and this may be something he needed to do even more urgently, was to fire up his base, to make MSNBC happy again, to make Democrats who are wondering if he could survive the speech or another entire term, to at least show some energy, even if it was angry, old man shaking a fist at a cloud style energy. He did that. So the fact that you and I were repelled, the fact that half of America was insulted, that's just the cost of doing business, because this is the way they're going to be for the next 8 months.
Mark, again, I'm speaking with my guest, Mark Davis, host of The Mark Davis Show. You can catch him on 660 AM. The Answer. Mark, has Biden was blaming former President Donald Trump, blaming Republicans for the border crisis. I'd love to get your response to that.
Well, the logic, if you can call it that, is that they had this wonderful compromise between the Biden administration and Senate Democrats and James Lankford, curiously on board just north of me in Oklahoma. And it's the best you can do. So if you don't say yes to this deal, then the border suddenly becomes your fault. Well, from Donald Trump on down, everybody knew that this border deal was a turkey. Everybody knew that without proper wall funding, it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. So the proper guidance is to say, look, this deal is bad. We're going to distance from it. Let's wait until we have a better president, Republican majority in the Senate, broader majority in the House, and then we'll really do something on the border, because this kind of half measures, unacceptable bill this time was worth rejection, and rejection is exactly what it got.
No, and I totally agree with you, Mark, because, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, the bill would have literally codified illegal immigration, nearly 2 million illegals coming into the country every single year. That was totally insane. Yeah, you're totally right about that. When it comes to the lasting effect of this speech, do you think that the base is really going to be invigorated to a point where this speech is going to be lasting? They're going to be motivated. Do you think this is, after a week or so, this is going to die down?
It may not last a week, because surely in the next week, President Biden will be somewhere, and he won't be as energetic, and he won't be reading from the prompter in some particular occasions. And there will be a gaffe, and there will be a setback, and we'll see who the real guy really is. And that's the same meanness, the same hostility, the same radical leftism, but it won't have the verve and the energy and the pop that last night's State of the Union did. In other words, it'll be right back to the same old, and the Democrats who are momentarily energized thinking, maybe, Lord, this will work out okay, they will realize that it probably won't.
Were you surprised? We only have about a minute and a half left. I'm speaking with my guest, Mark Davis of The Mark Davis Show. You can catch him on 660 AM. The Answer. Were you surprised when he came out? He started his speech with Ukraine. He talked about the J6 protesters, and he talked about how they were a dagger at the throat of American democracy. Were you shocked that he came out with such strong language right from the get-go?
Shocked, no, because you think about it, the one for him to come out on Ukraine, abortion, January 6th. This is what they've got. This is all they've got. Deal with your strong stuff up front, or what you think is your strong stuff. What do you think he's going to do? Come out and talk about the borders? What do you think he's going to do? Come out and try to gaslight us into telling us that the economy is doing great? He got to that later. But no, he wanted to get to scare us to death that Putin is the next Hitler, worship at the altar of abortion, and just continue this mindless patter about January 6th, because that is the kind of thing that energizes the base. And that was the thing that he ultimately wanted to do above all else in the State of the Union last night.
Okay, less than a minute left. Was there anything about the speech, Mark, that where you were like, okay, even for this guy, I'm surprised he's gone there? He straight out lied about cutting the federal deficit, for one.
Yeah, I mean, if I want to be gracious, I got to give the speechwriters credit for one thing. He said, Obamacare, it's still a big deal, which made those of us old enough to remember go back to when he dropped a kind of an F-bomb off mic when they were introducing
yes,
Obamacare.
I remember that.
That was at least it was semi-clever, semi-coherent. I'll give him that. The rest was largely garbage.
All right. Well, again, Mark Davis, make sure you check him out on the Mark Davis Show on 660 AM. The Answer. Mark, I appreciate you joining us today. God bless you, man. All right. Welcome back to the Jenna Ellis Show. Again, I'm your guest host filling in today, Carl Jackson. You can check me out, all things social media, at The Carl Jackson Show, Instagram, Facebook, True Social, Getter, X, The Carl Jackson Show. Also, subscribe to my podcast, The Carl Jackson Show. Well, that was a doozy of a speech last night. Actually, what I want to do, I want to go right to a video clip where Joe Biden started off talking about Ukraine, and he started off insulting other Americans right away. So let's go right to that video clip, guys. Clip number 2, por favor.
My purpose tonight is to wake up the Congress and alert the American people that this is no ordinary moment either. Not since President Lincoln and the Civil War have freedom and democracy been under assault at home as they are today. What makes our moment rare is that freedom and democracy are under attack both at home and overseas at the very same time. Overseas, Putin of Russia is on the march, invading Ukraine and sowing chaos throughout Europe and beyond. If anybody in this room thinks Putin will stop at Ukraine, I assure you he will not. But Ukraine can stop Putin. Ukraine can stop Putin if we stand with Ukraine and provide the weapons that needs to defend itself. That is all Ukraine is asking. They're not asking for American soldiers. In fact, there are no American soldiers at war in Ukraine, and I'm determined to keep it that way. But now, assistance to Ukraine is being blocked by those who want to walk away from our world leadership. It wasn't long ago when a Republican president named Ronald Reagan thundered, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Now, my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." That's a quote.
Apparently, we're supposed to take Joe Biden seriously based upon what the video clip that you just saw and based upon his State of the Union last night, State of the Union address, where he literally attacked at least half of all Americans and literally chased after his base. There's no doubt in my mind that they had no intention, Joe Biden or his staff had no intention of trying to endear themselves to independents and moderates across the country. So that was a very terrifying speech. But let's just go through Joe Biden's foreign policy chops, if you will, just since he's been the president of the United States. We had the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was a complete and utter debacle. You had his generals warning Joe Biden not to do so, but Joe Biden wanted a photo op before 9/11, if you might recall, and so he got us in tons of trouble. He got 13 service members killed as a result of that withdrawal. Not to mention, he also gave, over $80 billion of our military equipment away to the Taliban. Essentially, we all recall those videos of the Taliban terrorists literally trying to practice using some of our helicopters that we left behind. This guy is a complete and utter joke. No mention of the China threat. The China threat, China, where when Joe Biden allowed a spy balloon to literally traverse all across the entire United States, fentanyl coming through our borders, killing 100,000 Americans per year. He had nothing to say about China. His concern is Russia and Ukraine and J6 protesters. That's his biggest concern. If Joe Biden was serious about Russia and Ukraine, he had the opportunity to provide Ukraine weapons from the onset. Russia sat at the border of Ukraine for months while Joe Biden stood still and did absolutely nothing about it. And yet he wants to blame former President Trump for this. He wants to talk about what President Trump said. The truth of the matter is the world was at peace when former President Donald Trump was in office, whether you like the man or not. Absolutely insane. Guys, let's play one more clip. This is Joe Biden, clip number 4, talking about the J6 protesters. I want you to hear this, and I'm going to react to it afterwards. Video clip number 4, por favor, guys.
History is watching. History is watching. Just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Many of you are here on that darkest of days. We all saw with our own eyes the insurrectionists were not patriots. They'd come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people. January 6th lies about the 2020 election and the plots to steal the election posed a gravest threat to U.S. democracy since the Civil War. But they failed. America stood. America stood strong, and democracy prevailed. We must be honest. The threat to democracy must be defended. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th. I will not do that. This is the moment to speak the truth and to bury the lies. Here's the simple truth. You can't love your country only when you win.
Okay, so that was Joe Biden at his State of the Union address, scolding J6 protesters, scolding Republicans, lying about the J6 protests being the greatest attack on our nation since the Civil War. That is insane. Perhaps he forgot about the BLM riots and the Antifa riots of 2020. Perhaps he forgot that in 1954 there were 4 Puerto Rican terrorists that attacked the Capitol, unlike those who got inside of the Capitol building 2 years ago. The 1954 terrorists were armed with guns. They were actually insurrectionists. Perhaps he forgot that in 1971, there was a domestic terrorist group called the Weather Underground that bombed the Capitol, causing $300,000 worth of damage back then. Luckily, no one was killed in that particular attack. Or maybe he forgot that the so-called weathermen returned in 1983 for more, and they set off another bomb that tore through the second floor of the Capitol's north wing. So I'm sure Joe Biden, he must have forgotten about all of those attacks. This is Carl Jackson in for Jenna Ellis. We will be back to close it out. You guys stay tuned. Welcome back to Jenna Ellis Tonight. Jenna was able to interview Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio to get his reaction to last night's State of the Union address. We're going to go right to that video.
Well, and speaking of the GOP response, Etho Bishop, if our panel can stay standing by, let's bring in Representative Jim Jordan, who was one of those members of the GOP. And that's actually a great place to start. Jim Jordan, was this because the Speaker Johnson had indicated to the GOP conference to be a little more respectful than last year?
No, I mean, it's a State of the Union. He's the President of the United States. But the first thing I would say is it's Laken Riley, not Lincoln Riley. Let's get that right. For goodness sake, this is a young girl whose life was taken because of Biden's border policies or lack of a real border policy. And then, I mean, for me, Jenna, he was 18 minutes late getting there. It took him 10 minutes to walk down the aisle. And what's the first thing he talks about? A foreign country. He talks about Ukraine. I mean, where's the issues that really matter to the American people? The inflation that's driving the cost up of everything. The fact that we don't have a border. We have a completely unsecured border. The fact that we went from $2 gas under President Trump to $4 gas. Where's the real focus on the issues? So that, to me, just set the tone for the entire evening.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I thought it was actually very disrespectful to the American people to pretend that the State of the Union is strong and to pound his fist on the table when Americans are suffering, not only on the border, of course, Laken Riley's whole entire family. And we've seen the disaster that has been Biden's lack of security. And yet he kicked it to you in Congress to say that if Congress gives him a border bill, he'll sign it. What did you make of that when reports have said, and this FOIA has announced that he has admitted that he's the one flying 350,000 illegals to unknown destinations in America?
8 million migrants have come into the country in 3 years and 47 days of Joe Biden being the president. We're on pace to hit 12 million migrants coming in the country, all because of his policies, his decisions that he willfully, intentionally, deliberately put in place. Don't try to blame it on someone else, President Biden. You caused this. In fact, in the debate in the 2020 campaign, Joe Biden was asked about the border, and he says he wanted migrants to surge to the border. That was a direct quote. And guess what? They took him up on his offer. He caused it, and he told us he was going to cause it clear back in 2020 before he ever got to the Oval Office. So the idea that now somehow it's Republicans' fault is just ridiculous. And oh, by the way, we did pass legislation that would help with this situation. We passed it a year ago, and Chuck Schumer hasn't brought it up.
Yeah, it's just full of lies and campaign rhetoric, and unfortunately, this is the modern State of the Union. What did you make of what I thought was a very terrible moment in presidential history of the State of the Union addresses when Joe Biden addressed the justices who were sitting there directly and basically condemned them for the majority opinion in Dobbs that overturned Roe versus Wade? I thought that was incredibly disrespectful. And even Justice Kagan, who's, of course, part of the left wing on the bench, she did not seem impressed and actually seemed a little bit disgusted, if I could read her face correctly.
Yeah, it reminded me of several years ago when President Obama did the same thing after the decision on Citizens United and during a State of the Union. I think he actually then called out Justice Alito specifically. So it kind of reminded me of that. We have separate and equal branches of government. It is a hallmark of our government system, the best, the greatest ever in human history, the checks and balances that are designed to protect Americans' liberties and protect fundamental rights. So, yeah, I didn't think that's appropriate either.
And last question for you, and I so appreciate your time, Representative Jim Jordan, and thank you so much for the work that you do for conservative values and the Constitution on Capitol Hill. Where do we go from here? I mean, the Speaker Johnson has continued to say the impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden is open and will follow where the evidence leads, the rule of law. Mayorkas's impeachment is still pending. There was no mention from Joe Biden, of course, on any of those counts at all. He did mention my predecessor, former President Trump, not by name. So where does the GOP Congress go from here?
We just keep doing our job. We have a constitutional duty to do oversight of the executive branch. That includes the impeachment inquiry that was launched by the previous speaker back in the fall of last year. We need to continue to do that work. Next week, we're having Robert Hur, the special counsel, who gave us his report and said Joe Biden deliberately, intentionally mishandled classified information, and then deliberately and intentionally gave that classified information to the ghostwriter of his book. But of course, Special Counsel Hur said that because he's a forgetful old man who's going to come across in a sympathetic way to juries, I'm not going to charge him with the crime. So we got him testifying. We have other witnesses we need to talk to that the Justice Department is keeping from us. We may have to go to court on that, but we're going to do our duty, and then we'll make a decision as a conference if, in fact, we move forward with actual articles.
Well, let's keep you all in the majority after November. So Representative Jim Jordan, I so appreciate you taking the time tonight to talk to us on the Salem News Channel. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks so much.
Okay, so that was Jenna Ellis's interview with Representative Jim Jordan. They covered a lot of ground. Obviously, Biden being late to the speech. The reports are Biden was late because of the protesters that literally sat in front of the pro-Hamas protesters, by the way, that sat in front of his motorcade and would not allow his motorcade to get past. And then once he got into the Capitol, he then took an additional 10 minutes, just kind of being disrespectful of people's time. And then his speech started off with Ukraine. I mean, that is very interesting, regardless of where you fall on the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war, that it is the State of the Union for the United States of America, and he did not seem to be able to connect with the plight of average, everyday Americans. As a matter of fact, it didn't even seem like Joe Biden made an effort to do that. And then you had Jim Jordan point out with Jenna Ellis there that, listen, he didn't even get Laken Riley's name right. He calls her Lincoln. I mean, for God's sakes, that's something that you want to get right. But perhaps he didn't care as much, or he's not paying as much attention because he wants us to forget that it is him who's caused the border crisis inside of the United States, with 8 million illegals that we know of that have come into the border. And I'm not even sure that includes the 320,000 illegals that he's flown around the country. He scolded the justices of the Supreme Court, and I think that's because the left wants to pack on to the Supreme Court. And then he projected corruption, as Jim Jordan mentioned, when the corruption lies with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Hunter Biden working for his dad. It's as simple as that. That speech was a complete and utter disaster unless you're a left-wing radical. And unfortunately, I think that's who Joe Biden was placating to. I'm not sure it'll work for 2024. Until next time, guys, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you.